The night was alive with the sounds of Las Vegas, a city that never slept. Inside the International Hotel, a sea of faces waited in anticipation. It was July 31st, 1969, and the room was buzzing with excitement. Celebrities from all over the world had gathered for a special event. Elvis Presley's return to the stage after 9 long years. The stakes were high, and Elvis was more nervous than he had ever been. Backstage he stood, listening to the sweet inspirations perform. His heart was racing, and sweat poured down his face. He felt dizzy, gripped by a panic attack that wouldn't let go. But he couldn't afford to back out. This was his moment to shine, to prove that he was still the king. Finally, at 10:15 p.m., after comedian Sammy Shore's routine, Elvis took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, but he could feel the energy of the crowd. He hesitated for a few seconds, then launched into an all-out version of Blue Suede Shoes. The audience exploded with cheers, roars, and squeals. Elvis was back, and he was better than ever. The show was a triumph. Elvis performed with a passion and intensity that left the audience breathless. He pummeled the air, slid across the floor on his knees, and prowled like a panther. His slick black tunic glistened with sweat, and his rings sparkled under the stage lights. The audience was electrified, and the reviews were unanimously rave. But the night was far from over. After the show, a post-performance party erupted. Elvis kept a close eye on Priscilla, his wife. She was glowing, surrounded by admirers, and seemed to be enjoying the attention. Around 4:30 in the morning, Elvis and his friend, Tom Jones, slipped away from the party and headed to Elvis's suite. They were both exhausted. Tom had a sore leg, and Elvis was drained from the intense performance. They stripped off their shoes and clothes, flopped onto separate beds, and tried to catch some sleep, but their rest was short-lived. Priscilla's key rattled in the hallway door, and she burst into the sitting room. She was holding a small overnight bag, and marched past them to the bathroom. A few minutes later, she emerged in a nightgown and climbed into bed next to Elvis. "I have a friend here," Elvis growled, irritated. "Hush, he's sound asleep," Priscilla whispered. "So what? He's got his own big bed." Elvis leaped out of bed angry. "It matters to me," he said, and stormed out of the bedroom, followed by Priscilla. Tom, who had been pretending to sleep, quickly dressed and followed the sound of their arguing. The hallway door slammed and all went quiet. Tom peeked into the sitting room and found it empty. He decided to go back to bed, but his sleep was interrupted again. This time, he felt fingers running through his hair. It was dark and he couldn't see who it was, but he quickly rolled onto his stomach, angry and embarrassed. When he switched on the nightstand and lamp, Priscilla yanked the sheet off the bed, exposing him. He rolled back over, demanding the sheet back. She finally gave it to him, and he turned off the lamp again, but then snapped on the overhead light and started tickling him. In horror, Tom heard Elvis's key open the outer door. He panicked and ran into the bathroom, turning on the shower. "Man, this is it. He's never going to believe this," he thought. Elvis entered the bedroom and started yelling at Priscilla, then heard the shower running. He opened the bathroom door, and Tom did the only thing he could think of. He asked Elvis to throw him a robe, which Elvis did. Tom was in a bind. He hoped Elvis would believe Priscilla's lie, but he knew the truth would be hard to swallow. Elvis walked Tom downstairs to the cab stand, apologizing for his wife's behavior. "I can't go back to the suite," Elvis said. "I've got a hideaway over at the Aladdin. Should have just gone there to begin with. I'll drop you at the Flamingo." Tom nodded silently, his mind racing with the events of the night. As they walked, Elvis added, "You're about the only person I trust." Tom knew he had to get out of there quickly. "Believe me, I have no interest whatsoever in Elvis's wife," he thought. "She's a phony painted doll and brazen as the devil. She had me in a most uncomfortable and compromising position. I'll do anything I can for Elvis except share a room with him while his wife's anywhere in the vicinity." The night was a blur of chaos and confusion, but one thing was clear. The war between Elvis and Priscilla was far from over. In the summer of 1966, Harry Belafonte wrote a letter that spoke of deep shame and distress. He didn't explain what he had done, but it clearly upset a young woman named Joy Somers. She was so upset that she refused to talk to Harry, which made him very sad. Even when their friend Marlon Brando tried to help, Joy hung up on him. This got me curious. Who was Joy Somers? How did she know Harry and Marlon? And why did her silence cause them so much pain? Over time, I learned that Joy Somers was a central figure in many letters from Harry, Marlon, and others. But Joy wasn't her real name. She had many names, and one of them was Cathy. Cathy was a close friend of Carmen Montez, the woman who received all these letters. Cathy was not just a talented writer. She was also very beautiful and charismatic. Carmen, who was more than just a spiritual guide, saw an opportunity in Cathy's talent. Carmen had a dream of becoming a movie producer, and she thought Cathy's screenplay, Let There Be Light, could help her achieve that dream. Let There Be Light was a brilliant script. It was deep and spiritual, and it showed that Cathy was very mature for her age, which was only about 20. Carmen believed this script could change her life. It would allow her to combine her passion for spirituality with her ambition to produce movies. Carmen had a small talent agency where she represented models, actors, and stunt people. With Cathy, she decided to take a bigger step into the movie business. She acquired the rights to Let There Be Light and started working on packaging it. In the movie industry, a script becomes more valuable when it has commitments from known actors, directors, and other experienced people. Carmen thought that with Cathy's charm and talent, they could attract the right people to make the project a success. Cathy, with her beauty and charm, seemed like the perfect person to help Carmen close deals. Carmen believed that by helping Cathy's career, she could also advance her own. It was a win-win situation, or so she thought. But the story of Cathy, or Joy, was far from simple. Her interactions with Harry, Marlon, and others were filled with mystery and drama. As the letters continued, it became clear that Cathy's life was as complex and compelling as the characters in her screenplay. Carmen had always known that Cathy was different. Behind her polished exterior and talent, Cathy hid deep insecurities and self-doubt. She feared that she was a fraud, even though she was an amazing writer and painter. This made her vulnerable to people who could exploit her weaknesses. One of those people was Jim Matthews, a young man with a mixed background and a job in food service at the Century Plaza Hotel. Jim was obsessed with making it in the movie industry, but he also had a gambling problem and mood swings that Carmen recognized from her husband George, who had similar issues. Cathy had written a screenplay and was considering sharing it with Jim's friend in the business, in exchange for a producer credit and a cut of the profits. But she was wary of Jim's gambling habit and mood swings. When she decided to give the movie rights to Carmen instead, Jim was devastated and fell into a deep depression. To ease the tension, Carmen came up with a plan. She offered Jim a small profit share and an associate producer credit if he introduced the project to his friend. The project moved forward, and a draft of the screenplay was typed up. The author's name on the title page was Joy Somers, a pen name Cathy used for her work. The script was sent to Jim, who then mailed it to his friend, a famous singer and actor named Harry Belafonte. Surprisingly, Harry and Jim were half-brothers, a fact that Harry revealed in a letter to Carmen. Harry had a deep spiritual connection with Carmen, and trusted her with his problems and secrets. He wanted to meet the screenwriter, so Carmen arranged a lunch at the Beverly Wilshire. When Harry met Joy, he was captivated by her. She exuded a mysterious charm, and captivated him with her wit and confidence. Harry suggested that Marlon Brando, a close friend and civil rights activist, might be a good fit for the movie. He forwarded the script to Marlon and set up a meeting. Joy accompanied Carmen, and she charmed Marlon with her maturity and creativity. Marlon, like Harry, was drawn to Joy and started a complex relationship with her, seeing her as both a muse and a goddaughter. But the drama took a dark turn when Joy discovered she was pregnant by Jim. Jim's reaction was catastrophic. He stopped working, accumulated huge gambling debts, and eventually fled, leaving Joy to deal with his creditors and her own fears. She had a breakdown and stopped eating. Harry tried to support her, but his own financial and marital issues made it difficult. He grew angry and manipulative, and Joy stopped talking to him. Harry was devastated and worried that Jim had destroyed Joy. He believed that Jim was under the influence of a voodoo witch named Chloe. Harry's anger turned to a desire for revenge. He asked Carmen to promise that if anything happened to Joy, She would find Jim and tell him he was responsible for Joy's death and the death of their child. Harry's letters to Carmen were filled with disturbing visions and premonitions. 1 month before Joy's child was due, Harry had a vision of her lying injured in the street. He found her bruised and unconscious near a swimming pool and took her to a doctor. The doctor found that the male fetus had a fractured back. Joy told Harry that Jim had attacked her during an argument. Harry, furious, tried to find Jim but failed. Joy, in her depressed state, was persuaded to file charges against Jim. When she suddenly disappeared, Harry and Carmen feared the worst. Desperate, Harry came up with a plan. He sent Carmen an official letter promising unlimited funding for the movie, hoping it would lure Jim out. He also sent a personal letter explaining that it was a ruse and that he didn't have the funds. He asked Carmen to call Jim and read the fake letter, hoping Jim would help find Joy to get the money. Over the next few weeks, Harry arranged financial support for Joy's hospital expenses and bought baby things. He worried about the child's future and the complications of adoption, but Joy was still missing. Harry rebuked Carmen for not trying hard enough to contact Jim. Then Joy reappeared at her apartment, very ill and refusing to say where she had been. Harry spent the next day with her, as she was so weak from not eating that she couldn't get out of bed. Harry was concerned that the unborn child could be born with severe health issues due to Joy's malnourishment. The only thing he learned from Joy was that she had left a note for Jim, threatening to kill herself and the baby if he ignored her. Harry begged Carmen to find Jim, as Joy had lost her will to live. The next day, after Joy didn't hear from Jim, Harry urged Carmen to reach out to Jim immediately. Jim was the only one who could help Joy, who was walking around but was even more depressed. The letter revealed a man who was truly afraid that his loved one would go buy some razor blades the minute he left her alone. That evening, Harry rushed Joy to the hospital. After 5 hours of labor, James M. Matthews was finally born on September 21, 1966. Harry and Marlon took turns caring for Joy and little Jim, knowing that Joy still loved Jim, the father of her child, but was deeply upset over his withdrawal from their lives. Harry provided living expenses, and Marlon took care of the medical expenses for the baby and for Joy, who was struggling to regain her health. The relationship between Joy and Harry slowly grew more distant and business-oriented, while Joy's relationship with Marlon became deeper and more personal. Harry never knew Joy Sommer's real name, which was Cathy Kane. He only called her Joy, the confident and talented screenwriter. Toward the end of Harry's letters to Carmen, he sadly acknowledged that he had lost Joy, but if he ever had the chance to win her back, he'd give it everything he had. He never had that chance. 6 months after little Jim was born, Marlon sent his first surviving letter to Carmen. He knew that Joy Sommers was actually Cathy Kane, but he mostly called her Kit. Kit had been ill since the birth of her son, and was in the hospital for 10 days with a serious case of anemia. Marlon had taken on the responsibility of caring for the baby. Kit had made Marlon promise to investigate Jim Matthews more deeply. Marlon found out that Jim had been married during his entire relationship with Kit. When Marlon told her, Kit went into shock and almost died. She lost her vision and ability to speak, and came close to dying. Marlon tried to comfort her by explaining that Jim had been separated from his wife for a long time and had tried to get a divorce. He told her that Jim had pretended to lose interest in her to avoid confessing the truth. None of this helped ease her emotional state. When Kit charged Jim with physical abuse, she had signed the papers as Mrs. James Matthews. Marlon worried that the authorities would discover another Mrs. Matthews, and Kit would be in serious trouble. Marlon's wife, Tarita, had filed a complaint against Kit for alienation of her husband's affection. Marlon called it ridiculous, but didn't deny the truth. Clearly, Kit had cast a spell over both Harry and Marlon. Over the next few months, Harry slowly withdrew from Kit's life and became more of a career advisor. Marlon slowly realized that Kit's affection for him was not romantic, and he became more of a loving uncle and matchmaker. However, I suspect he never completely gave up on his dream of a life with Kit. After months of watching Elvis and Priscilla's troubled relationship, Marlon suggested to Carmen that he had found the perfect replacement for Priscilla Kit. He told Carmen that our spirit friend, meaning Jenny, Elvis's deceased true love, had let him know she was unhappy because Elvis was suffering so much. Marlon lobbied for Carmen's support, saying Jenny would be strongly in favor of Elvis and Kit being together. In a letter from January 1968, Marlon described Kit for the first time. He noted how much she resembled Priscilla, and how she had been changing her wardrobe to match Pris's style, flowing, modern, and feminine. Marlon believed Kit wouldn't have to work to fit into Elvis's world. She already was his type of girl. Marlon reflected on the time he, Harry, and Carmen had spent trying to get Kit and Jim back together. After Jim proved to be worthless, they all thought Kit and Elvis might make it together. Marlon fantasized about a life with Kit, though he never directly mentioned it to Carmen. One evening, while Kit was at Marlon's house, Tom Jones called Marlon with a request. He was about to record some songs, and needed Marlon to pick up a letter he had written to Carmen. Tom didn't want to lose it during his performance. Marlon and Kit went to the studio, and Marlon went inside to get the letter. Tom invited Marlon to join the audience, and Marlon asked Kit to come along. Kit was hesitant because she was wearing a skimpy pair of red pants Harry had bought her, but with some encouragement, she agreed. They took 2 seats in the front row. The first 2 songs were big productions with dancers, but then a problem with the costumes caused a delay. Tom offered to sing a couple more songs without the cameras, and the audience loved it. During the first song, Tom saw Kit in her red pants and smiled. On the second number, he danced over to her and kissed her. She covered her face with her hands, and Tom grinned. He kissed her again, and as the song was ending, he kissed her a 3rd time and whispered something to her. Marlon asked Kit what Tom had said, and she said Tom had invited her backstage. Marlon accompanied Kit to Tom's dressing room, but the room was surrounded by fans. Finally, Marlon yelled Tom's name, and Tom signaled for him to wait. Marlon was eager to continue his evening with Kit, so he motioned that he was leaving. Tom looked disappointed. By the time Marlon reached the car, Kit had disappeared. A fan told him a woman in red pants had climbed into a Cadillac with Tom Jones. "Lucky woman," the fan said. Marlon was furious. He tried to track down Tom and Kit for hours. He even called Elvis to find out where Tom might be. Elvis told him that Tom's manager, Gordon Mills, rented a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Marlon called the hotel, and the manager said Tom had asked not to be disturbed. Marlon drove to the hotel and staked out Gordon Mills' bungalow. Around 5 in the morning, the light in the bathroom went out. Marlon's patience was gone. He went to the bungalow's main door and started pounding. No one answered, which made him even angrier. Marlon went home and repeatedly called Kit's apartment. At 8:30, he drove back to the bungalow and almost broke down the door. Tom, in bedsheets, opened the door, and Marlon pushed his way in. Tom was alone, but 2 glasses of flat champagne stood together on a nightstand. And, "Have you lost someone?" Marlon asked. "Seems so," Tom replied. "Where is she?" "Marlon, what's this all about? She said she wasn't your girl. I wouldn't do that to you." "She's not really." "Then what's all the fuss? I don't even know her name. I tried everything, but she wouldn't tell me. Do you know it?" Marlon shook his head, a silent white lie. He noticed a folded note on the bureau, and recognized Kit's handwriting. The note said she and Tom would meet again when things were different. She wanted Tom to have her antique gold pendant with 2 ruby hearts, so he would remember he was always part of her. "Part of her?" Marlon shouted. Tom snatched the pendant and the note away. "She gave it to me, not you. Am I right?" Marlon hit Tom in the chin. Tom staggered but started grinning. "Mate, what I do to you, tell me what I did." Enraged, Marlon raised his fist again. But Tom wouldn't defend himself. In the end, Marlon left the bungalow before he could do more damage. In a letter to Carmen, Marlon rationalized his behavior as disappointment that Kit had fallen for Tom after Marlon had decided she was the right match for Elvis. I think Carmen probably knew that fighting Tom said a lot more about Marlon's unconfessed love for Kit. Marlon said he would never reveal how to find Kit or give her name to Tom, whom he still loved and admired despite his anger. Between the lines, I saw a plea for Carmen to do the same. Tom told Carmen that the night of the taping, he had seen this lovely girl in red pants and felt drawn to her. He didn't believe in love at first sight, but he felt compelled to possess her. He described how his soul wept when she touched his fingertips and how he felt like his soul would separate from his body and move into hers. He called her LWLI, meaning baby in Welsh. Tom and Kit got back together, and their relationship intensified. LWLI must have revealed to Tom that she knew Carmen because he often referred to their friendship. In a letter before Tom was returning to London, he told Carmen that Miss Nameless had taken hold of his mind and wouldn't let go. He suggested that Carmen propose to LWLI the adventure of going with him to England. Tom would buy a ticket for her. She didn't go to London with Tom, a decision Marlon applauded. Marlon simmered over Kit's impulsive fling. He blamed Tom for abducting her, and feared Tom would break her heart. While Tom was in London, he and Marlon spoke via long distance, and nearly came to blows over the phone. Marlon demanded to know why Tom hadn't opened the bungalow door right away. "That's my business, not yours," Tom said. "You're a bastard, you know that. Don't be so hypocritical. I'm sure you've slept with more women in your life than I've even looked at. I doubt that." "There've only been 3 besides my wife," Tom said unconvincingly. Marlon asked, "What are you going to do about her now?" "I can't do anything without you knowing about it. And right now I'm in England, what can I do from here?" Marlon was left to simmer, his thoughts swirling with a mix of anger, jealousy, and a deep, unconfessed love for Kit. Marlon felt an ache in his heart every time he thought about Tom and Kit. He knew how Tom felt, that deep, burning desire to be with the person you love. But Marlon couldn't shake the feeling of jealousy that gnawed at him. He had to talk about it with someone, and Carmen was the only one he could trust. In one of his letters, Marlon wrote to Carmen about how he and Tom had stopped sparring. It was like a cold front had moved in, and the air between them felt heavy. Marlon told Carmen that he felt responsible for Kit, and it hurt to fight with his friend. But the more he saw Tom and Kit together, the more the jealousy faded. Tom was so good to Kit, and Marlon couldn't help but admire that. A month later, Kit asked Marlon to send a small gift with his Christmas present to Tom. Marlon felt a pang of suspicion. "So are you using me to send secret messages to Tom?" he asked. Kit was offended and pointed out that Marlon had even checked the record of Welsh hymns she had sent to Tom. Marlon felt guilty, but the jealousy was hard to ignore. As time went on, Marlon noticed how much Tom cared for Kit. Tom started to believe that he and Kit might be distant relatives, which he found exciting. He thought it might mean they were meant to be together, 2 souls from different worlds brought together by destiny. Marlon didn't like the idea of them being related, but he couldn't deny the love between them. One day, Marlon saw a photo of Tom's family in a magazine. Tom's grandmother, with her hand on Tom's shoulder, looked a lot like Kit's mother. It was like a sign, and Marlon couldn't shake the feeling that Harry might be right about them being related. He told Carmen about the photo, hoping she could help make sense of it all. Tom, in his letters to Carmen, wrote about how he felt a deep connection with Kit. One evening, while they were kissing, he was suddenly sure they were related. He told Carmen he didn't care if it was wrong. He couldn't stop loving Kit. He even joked that their story would be worth a fortune to Mr. Ripley. Marlon's letters to Carmen showed his growing concern. He didn't approve of the idea of Tom and Kit being related, but he also saw how much they loved each other. It was a complicated mess, and Marlon felt helpless. Meanwhile, Elvis was dealing with his own struggles. His letters to Carmen were filled with a sense of loneliness that was hard to ignore. He was the king, the man who could make audiences swoon with a single glance, but he was also a man who felt deeply alone. He and Carmen had a bond that was strong, but they had never met in person. It was a strange relationship, built on trust and shared secrets, but it kept Elvis company in his darkest moments. Elvis had a plan to finally meet Carmen. He wanted to fly her to Las Vegas to see one of his shows. He was nervous and excited, but he was also careful. He didn't want the media to find out, so he had to do everything himself. He called hotels, booked a car, and even got Tom to help get tickets to the show. It was a big deal, and Elvis was hopeful. The night of the show, Carmen and Kit flew to Las Vegas, stayed at a motel, and went to the International. Marlon was there too, and he wrote to Carmen about how amazing Elvis looked on stage. The audience was electrified, and Marlon could see how much Elvis enjoyed it. But after the show, Carmen and Kit never got to meet Elvis. Marlon was disappointed and wrote to Carmen, hoping they would get another chance. Elvis's letters to Carmen often mentioned his belief in out-of-body experiences. He felt that Carmen could visit him in a spiritual way, helping him sort out his thoughts and feelings. He even mentioned a time when he had been hypnotized, and the hypnotist had used his secrets to blackmail him. It made him cautious, but he trusted Carmen with everything. Marlon had his own experiences with the spiritual world. He sometimes wrote messages that he didn't remember writing, as if someone else was controlling his hand. It was strange, but it made him and Elvis believe in the power of the spirit. Despite the challenges, Marlon, Tom, and Elvis all found comfort in their letters to Carmen. She was a constant in their lives, someone they could confide in and trust. For Marlon, it was about friendship and love. For Tom, it was about finding a connection with Kit. For Elvis, it was about breaking the loneliness that followed him everywhere. And for Carmen, it was about being there for them, no matter what. Marlon Brando, the famous actor, had a curious side to him. He sometimes wrote letters that seemed to be guided by someone else. Some people thought this was because of a condition called dissociative identity disorder, DID, where a person has different personalities that take control at different times. Each personality could have its own way of thinking, feeling, and even remembering things. They might even show different physical reactions, like being left-handed or right-handed. Others believed it was something more supernatural, calling it spirit writing. This idea was explored by Adrian Lee, a writer who knows a lot about the paranormal. Adrian thought that Marlon was being used by spirits to write messages. One of these spirits was called Jenny, who claimed to be Elvis Presley's true love. Jenny once wrote a message through Marlon, saying that Tom Jones had been in a serious car accident and was paralyzed. This was true, even though no one else knew about it at the time. Another spirit that wrote through Marlon called itself Chief Talking Eagle. This spirit claimed to be connected to Elvis and Carmen, saying they were all related in some spiritual way. These messages were important to Elvis, who believed in the spiritual world and thought Marlon had a special connection with Chief Talking Eagle. Elvis and Carmen had a deep friendship, and their letters show how much they supported each other. Elvis would often write about his struggles, his fears, and his loneliness. He trusted Carmen enough to open up about his health issues, and his worries about becoming addicted to painkillers. He even shared his feelings of emptiness, and how he felt like he was falling apart. Sometimes he would write just to connect, asking if Carmen was watching the same TV show he was. Elvis's life was not easy. He was a celebrity, and with that came a lot of stress and danger. He had fears that were sometimes exaggerated by his experiences. One of the most significant events that shaped his later life was a brutal attack in 1964 during the making of the movie Kissin' Cousins. The producer, Sam Katzman, was known for being very cheap and often mistreated people on set. He was also rumored to have ties to criminal activities, and was known for his lecherous behavior. Katzman and Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, were both focused on saving money. Katzman was hired to keep the budget low, but his methods were harsh. He would cut corners, use cheap props, and even shorten the editing time to save money. This made the production of Kissin' Cousins a nightmare for Elvis. He had to play two roles, which was already difficult, but Katzman made it worse by rushing the process. Elvis and Katzman often argued, and Katzman would insult Elvis, calling him unprofessional. Elvis vowed never to work with Katzman again, but he had no choice because of a contract Parker had signed. The next movie Elvis made with Katzman was Harum Scarum in 1965. Despite his initial enthusiasm, Elvis quickly realized it was another terrible project. Katzman made him do all his own stunts, and the sword-fighting scenes were rushed, leading to injuries. Elvis felt unsupported and frustrated, and Katzman accused him of slowing down production and increasing costs. This experience added to Elvis's growing list of stresses and contributed to his downward spiral. Elvis's letters to Carmen reveal the pain and fear he was going through. They show how much he needed her support and how much he valued their friendship. Despite the challenges, they stayed connected, and their friendship provided a sense of comfort and stability in Elvis's tumultuous life. Elvis felt trapped on the set of Harum Scarum, a movie that seemed to go from bad to worse. The budget overruns were so bad that the producer, Sam Katzman, started cutting corners. He used old scenery from a 1925 movie and costumes from a 1944 film. Even Elvis's dagger was from a 1939 movie. It was like Katzman was trying to make the cheapest movie possible. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, tried to salvage the mess by suggesting a talking camel narrate the movie, but it was too late. Harum Scarum turned out to be a disaster. Colonel Parker was furious and blamed Katzman, who in turn blamed Elvis and Parker. The bad movie turned into a bitter feud. 2 years and 9 months later, Elvis was about to become a father, but his joy was overshadowed by a package that arrived one January morning. It contained cassette tapes of Elvis's intimate conversations with young women from the Harum Scarum set. The tapes included Elvis's complaints about Priscilla, his wife, which could be taken as him seeking comfort from other women. The tapes were sent to Priscilla and her parents, who already doubted Elvis's fidelity. Elvis was also receiving threatening calls and a note that said, "We know you're alone." He tried to install an electric eye for security, but it didn't work. Feeling vulnerable, Elvis told his friend Carmen Montez that he had aged 30 years since the Harum Scarum shoot. To make matters worse, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, and Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot in Los Angeles. Elvis was deeply disturbed by these events, but was forbidden by Colonel Parker to speak out. Despite the turmoil, Elvis was excited about his next movie, Charo. It was a Western, and he played a former outlaw named Jess Wade. The role was intense, and Elvis had to endure a painful branding scene. The movie was filmed in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, and for once, Katzman wasn't the producer. While shooting Charo, Elvis faced several unsettling events. An actor really punched him during a fight scene, a rattlesnake appeared in his trailer, and the same actor accidentally fired a blank near the director's face. These incidents made Elvis feel like he was being targeted. Back in Los Angeles, Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie, was in danger. A man tried to break into her nursery, and a woman claimed to be Elvis's lover and said Lisa Marie was her child. Elvis was worried that these incidents were connected to the Harum Scarum tapes. After finishing Charo, Elvis went to Palm Springs to rest. He then flew to Memphis on September 25th. In a letter to Carmen, Marlon Brando revealed what happened next. Elvis and Marlon were moving boxes from Elvis's old house in Bel Air to his new place. They were in the garage when they heard a commotion outside. 2 unfamiliar Cadillacs were parked in the driveway, and men started breaking in. Elvis and Marlon were attacked by a group of men, including Marcus and Shaul, who were part of the Katzman gang. Marcus tried to whip Elvis, but Elvis refused to cooperate. Marlon stepped in to protect his friend, but the other assailant pointed a gun at Marlon's head. Elvis was forced to remove his shirt and hand over his belt. Just as Elvis was about to be beaten, Shaul stopped the others. He had other plans for Elvis. The situation was tense, and Elvis and Marlon were in real danger. Elvis's life was about to take a dark turn, and the events that followed would haunt him for the rest of his life. Marlon couldn't believe what had happened to his friend Elvis. After the gang had left, Elvis had managed to call Marlon, but the call was short and cut off. Marlon rushed to Elvis's house, fearing the worst. When he arrived, he found Elvis bound and barely conscious, his body covered in bruises and cuts. Marlon untied him and helped him to safety, but the damage was already done. Elvis was taken to the hospital, checked in under a fake name to avoid the press. Marlon stayed by his side, making sure he got the best care possible. The doctors were worried about internal injuries, and Elvis needed X-rays. Marlon called the police, but he begged them to keep the incident quiet. He didn't want Elvis to suffer any more than he already had. The next day, Marlon wrote a letter to Carmen, explaining everything that had happened. He told her how Elvis had been tortured, how the gang had left him for dead, and how he had managed to escape. Marlon was terrified for his friend, but he also felt a deep sense of anger. He wanted to find the men who had done this and make them pay. When Marlon visited Elvis in the hospital, he found his friend pale and weak, but his face was unmarked. The bruises and wounds were hidden under sheets, making it easy for anyone to think Elvis was just another patient. Elvis was awake, but he didn't want to talk about what had happened. He seemed distant, like a part of him had given up. Marlon tried to lift Elvis's spirits by telling him that Carmen would be watching one of his movies on TV the next day, but Elvis didn't react. He just stared ahead, lost in his own thoughts. Marlon could see the pain in Elvis's eyes, and it broke his heart. In the days that followed, Elvis slowly began to heal. The physical wounds would take time to fade, but the emotional scars would be harder to heal. Marlon stayed with him, offering support and comfort. He knew that Elvis would need all the help he could get to move forward. Marlon also contacted a private investigator to help find the men who had attacked Elvis. He wanted justice, but he also wanted to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. The investigation was long and difficult, but Marlon was determined to see it through. As Elvis recovered, Marlon realized that his friend had changed. The experience had left him more vulnerable, more guarded. But Marlon was there for him, just like he always had been. He knew that they would face this challenge together, and they would come out stronger on the other side. Elvis eventually left the hospital, but the memories of that night stayed with him. Marlon and Carmen were there to help him every step of the way. They were a team, and they would always be there for each other, no matter what.